Hey everyone, we'll get started here in just a second. Getting our wonderful guest on stage and letting a few more people funnel in, but really excited to kick this off. Everyone is making me ready for happy hour right now based on the afternoon drinks. So it feels like maybe we should have had a happy hour session today as we talk about productivity. But really excited to dive into this today. So as we kind of kick things off, I'll introduce myself. I'm Molly Bodensteiner. I will be moderating kind of the webinar today. I've been I would like to say revenue operations since before it was cool, but spent about 12 years in operations roles with last decade managing revenue operations teams at 6 different organizations. So I'm really excited about our guest here today. I think, if we talked about the word of the year, right? Productivity seems to be that word, and seems to be that kind of initiative that companies are really, do more with less and looking for efficiency and productivity. So with that, I will let our guests introduce themselves, and we'll jump in. One thing I would like to encourage is these sessions are far more productive when we're answering your questions. So use the chat on the side. We will address questions. Would love to know, what are things you're struggling with? How can we help answer these questions? What have you seen success with? Let's lean on each other and have a really collaborative session. As much as I like to hear my own voice, I'd like to hear yours a little bit more. So with that being said, Dustin, I'll turn it over to you for introductions.
Thank you so much, Molly. My name is Dustin Deno. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for a company called Affinity. Affinity provides a CRM for private capital customers. So we sell into venture, growth equity, private equity firms. And I've also launched Affinity for Salesforce, which is relationship intelligence and connecting your email and calendar to Salesforce as well. So happy to be here and excited for the conversation.
Hey everybody, I'm Andy Codner. I lead revenue operations here at Bazaar Voice. We are a ratings and reviews platform. We've been around for quite a while. We've also taken on quite a bit in overall e-commerce and social selling as well. Also been in RevOps for quite a while after a stint in sales. So this is what I do, and all about productivity. When I heard the topic, was really excited to be here. I'm dialed in today from San Francisco.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys both so much for being here today. Really excited about the insights and where we're going. So, we've heard a lot, right? Like B2B selling is getting more difficult. We're talking a lot about productivity. First question is why do we think this is? And what's been kind of you guys' experience with this over the last, let's call it year?
I can start. I think when you think about the last several years in sales, there's been an abundance of tools and methodologies and approaches that have been focused to supposedly make the seller more productive. And in fact, they've kind of bombarded them with a lot of things to do and input and update. And I think we've gotten a little crazy with all the things that we've put on them. And so that when you think about the actual time they spend talking to customers and moving deals forward, it feels like it dwindles year over year. And I think you have that phenomenon that's been happening for a long time. And then you have this other phenomenon where we also, as organizations, when, money was cheap, people were growing it. Growth at all costs meant that you could scale your capacity very, very quickly, and literally the cost side of things didn't really matter as much because funding was very easy to get, and growth, the top line growth number, is what drove a lot of your valuations. And so now that regime has shifted a little bit, quite a bit, there's been a shift towards real productivity and not just time spent selling, but also ARR per person or per seller, and driving that attainment up is a huge focus for a lot of revenue organizations. So I think it's a combination of the influx of tools and methodologies we've been putting on sellers for a long period of time, and then the kind of regime change from a investment and funding perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Andy,
and go ahead, Molly.
I was gonna turn it over to you. The one thing I was just gonna add is, it's now growth at the lowest possible cost. This whole
Yeah.
paradigm has now shifted.
For sure.
Yeah, and from a RevOps perspective, very much agreed with Dustin's point of view. And by the way, we didn't rehearse this stuff. I mean, these are important topics. So I think these are topical because the environment around us has changed a lot, and I think all of those things are true. In addition, I think that prioritization and where we're asking our sellers and our managers to spend their time really makes a big difference today. To Dustin's point, there's a lot of clutter out there. There are lots of different tools. We get asks from all kinds of different teams inside of organizations trying to get face time with sellers. Hey, what do you think about this new functionality? What do you think about this new messaging? Hey, how do you think customers would react to this, this, and this? I think getting more efficient and productive means a couple different things. It's how we're asking our teams to spend their time in terms of what good looks like. And you'll probably hear me say that multiple times today because I've been saying that a lot in the last few months. And also helping guide them in terms of importance. So, hey, we expect you to spend time here because we feel like it'll save you time. And again, it's not growth at all costs right now. It may never be again in this sort of a SaaS arena. I think the LTV to CAC, your customer acquisition cost overall, is really critical to get more efficient, be able to take more customers on without spending lots more money or lots more time.
Yeah, one of the things that I think that you said that, really resonated with me, and I think you answered my next question, is like, how do you define productivity, right? So if you could even just say that one more time for the group, I think that that's just such a good definition of it that, like, I was like, man, that hits.
Yeah. The best way I like to explain productivity and efficiency is getting at least the same amount, hopefully more done with less time, rather in less time, with less effort and less cost. So that means quotas are there, but people are getting higher in terms of participation rates. They're doing better against them. We're bringing on more customers at a lower cost, all in the same amount of time.
No, I think that's great. I think, because I think, you think about time, right? It's like, how do you do more with less hours in the day? But it's really being clear on what that more is and why that more matters in terms of, the quality of the output and like the result that you're getting. We can make a lot of things faster and easier and better, but like, are they the right things? And so when you're thinking about improving that productivity for your sellers, for your team, how do you, I'm going to say, prioritize and quantify where you're putting that energy and effort, right? And what have been some examples of that?
I think you also have to be careful about just focusing on giving sellers more time. Like, more time back to them doesn't necessarily translate back to revenue. And so what you really need to do is break down how they do the job every single day. What are the different aspects of it? And what actually have you seen translate to revenue, and make sure you invest heavily in those things and get continuous feedback from your team around, because you'd be very surprised around different processes or tools or frameworks that tell a great story of time savings, but in reality that could save them a bunch of time, but it may not produce more revenue. So I think looking at the overall productivity of your team in terms of attainment, and do you have a broad group of a large group of your team kind of getting past that watermark of, say, like an 80% threshold to really, prove that the outputs you're getting or the inputs you're driving so-called productivity on are actually translating to revenue, is something we focus quite a bit on.
How do you look at, when we talk about revenue, right? There's the like hard, correlation, and then what's more of like the influence as well when you think about this. So like when you're trying to make these decisions of what is directly going to impact revenue and what might impact experience, which in the long tail looks at revenue, like what are some of the decision points that you're you're evaluating.
Yeah, so when we think about, like, when we look at deals and this idea of getting multi-threaded in deals, and so how do we, and we first look at, does that actually make an impact on improved close rates and revenue? And then we find out yes, and then we institutionalize that in our processes. And that's an example of something that probably takes more time for the sellers, right? Because we're asking them to to talk to more people earlier, but that translates into higher close rates, which therefore is actually real productivity gains. And so it's things like that we try to measure the improvements on the revenue impact, and then hard code those into the sales process. And you'll find that, like, kind of slow and steady actually gets you to higher revenue numbers. And that's an example of ways we've probably done it, but on the surface, it actually may have decreased the normal way of looking at productivity, so to speak. I don't know, Andrew, if you had any thoughts on that?
Yeah, riffing off of that, I think the biggest themes that have come up, my last few jobs, honestly, have been clarity and then being prescriptive. So I think at the different portions in the funnel, there's obviously the either prospecting yourself or getting leads, if we're talking about AEs, account execs, the sellers themselves, all the way on through. I think there are different ways to prioritize things like enablement. Which activities do we want people to perform at different points in the funnel? I think, if you're talking about pipeline generation, depending on your sales cycle length, that could impact the current month or quarter that you're in, or maybe it's further out. So I think that we've really focused on being a lot more prescriptive on what activities to perform at different points in the sales cycle or in the customer journey. We've also been looking a lot at win-loss data, because I think it tells us if there's certain activities that have been performed that have been much more successful. We're using our first line managers to really get those messages out and to follow up with their sellers, to spend their time on those and repeat those activities. Again, more effective activities tend to increase your win rates. And let's not forget, it's not all about new business. Churn is a really big factor too. So we look at retention quite a bit, that relationship with, account managers or customer success, depending how you're set up. Both of those are really important because they affect, quote, revenue or bookings as they're coming in. So we've just spent a lot of time being very clear on what things look like, when to perform those actions. And then we've been checking in, not in like a big brother kind of a fashion, but hey, how's it going? We want to get your feedback so we can help make sure that we're spreading what works for you to other teams. And that's been really helpful lately.
One of the biggest, I'm going to call it like challenges that I faced in running revenue operations teams in these pieces is like some of the consistency and the enablement of this. And so as you think about making these changes to the selling process, you've gone through kind of the pilot and like proven the value. Now you're ready to scale and move it into enablement. What have been some of like the change management advice pieces? I'm eager to learn this, right? Because I feel like this is something that I've run into everywhere. Is like, how do you manage that behavior the right way?
We did something at the beginning of this year and beginning of last year to all of last year that really drove a ton of adoption of our enablement. And so we tied it to their careers. So we have implemented essentially an automatic promotion path. So there's multiple jobs within each job. And in order for them to get promoted, they have to consistently perform and then also do the enablement. And so we have three, like we have an AE1, AE2, AE3 within each segment. And so in order for them to get promoted, they have to consistently perform, but it allows us to, so like the AE1 enablement bucket is how to do the job. And that gives us a bucket to put all the different things that we need into their, to make sure that they're prepared. And that's like how to do their job. And then AE2 is like the enablement's how to master the job. And then AE3 is how to move up segment. And so I found it very, very helpful because reps, they take the path of least resistance and a lot of the enablement becomes like an afterthought for them. But when you tie it to their career, all of a sudden they pay attention to it. And so we've had a lot of luck with that, and our enablement team's done a great job of
if you want somebody to do something, pay them to do it.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's part of the job is to learn and to grow. And so we've just instilled that in the kind of career framework that we have. That's really helped.
Andy, what
We've
have you
also
seen on
done,
your end? Yeah. Sorry.
we've done a lot of work with career paths as well. And I think a lot of it is just, again, taking the ambiguity out of it for people. And I also think that sometimes you'll hear not always your most junior level sellers or those earliest in their career. Sometimes they'll say, well, I want to be a manager next. And to me, in a lot of roles, I find them to be very different career paths. Being a manager and being an individual contributor in sales is a very different job. And there's nothing wrong with being an individual contributor for a long time or your entire career. In fact, you'll probably make more money in the long run. It is a different way to look at it. But I think that we also try to simplify. We've started doing a lot more certifications, but we're doing them in a way where we're having other sellers teach them. So we're not having as many third parties, or we're not having RevOps people talk at them. We're having a peer who's done something, and sometimes we'll put a peer through a certification, like even like a third party, like a Sandler or your methodology of choice. And we will have them be the centerpiece. It's sort of like the concept of, wow, I want to do what they're doing. And especially when someone's had a promotion or that career pathing that we've tried to formalize more internally with our human resources organization, that's a really great model. People can model the other person they've seen and say, wow, I want to be like that. I want to do that. And we're doing it in a way that's easy to understand and it's measurable. But it's not just easily attainable. It's a little bit of a stretch. It's definitely another level. There are new skills that they have to be able to demonstrate and take on. So I wouldn't call it as formal as a certification process, but there are certainly different things that we're trying to track and measure along the way. A little bit of a competition so they can compare themselves to one another. I mean, it is sales after all, but also to measure their own development. We want people to feel like they're learning and they're getting something out of it too. It should be a two-way street in terms of the environment that we're providing.
No, I love that. And one of the things from the change management perspective, obviously there's always areas of improvement. We can always make adjustments to things. Like, do you guys have a strong rule of thumb of as we make these evaluations or as we roll out kind of these changes, is it quarterly? Is it semi-annual? Is it annual? How do you think about kind of that implementation of change and that rate of change, so you're avoiding, the change fatigue, which I think becomes more destructive as you try to add more in?
I can go first on this one.
Yeah.
I literally have an email on my screen right there. And it is, we try to build out an enablement and a learning roadmap. What sorts of things do we feel are important? And we have several, probably 5 different initiatives right now. One of them is sort of having a more common language across our sellers. We found that depending when someone started in their role, depending if they were an external hire or an internal promotion, depending who their manager is, they've been referring to different things in sales cycles or even stages in different ways. So that's one where we want to kind of have that common language woven through. We have new pricing and packaging that we've rolled out not so long ago. We have 2 companies that we just acquired over the past 3 to 4 months. Yes, 2 acquisitions at once. It's super fun from an integration perspective. And add to that, we have some sales skills we've been looking at. Oh, and we've just started annual planning. We have a May 1st fiscal. So it's a little bit offset. But if you think about all of those things, there's a lot of, there are all kinds of enablement concepts, cognitive dissonance. You've got learning thresholds. People are only going to be able to absorb a certain amount every month. We do try to look at them monthly, Molly. I think quarterly is nice to have a roadmap. But then after the quarter starts, we look at all of those things and we try to reprioritize. Sometimes we'll have something competitive in the marketplace come up, but that means we can't just add on to the pile of what we want to go at teams like Dustin's. Instead, we have to talk to Dustin and his leaders and say, hey, here are the 5 things. We just got a new one. We feel like we should move this down the stack. Maybe we'll do this next quarter. Maybe we'll do it next month. But that overload, if you're going to spend time and investment teaching people things that not just to learn, but it's enablement. We want them to perform an action after they take this information in. You have to make sure they can actually retain it and then go do something all on their own with no support around them. And if you give, in my view, it's about 3 or 4 hours of material a month with some practice to really make it stick. If you start getting beyond that, it's really not worth doing. You really have to reprioritize constantly on what's most important, and then take a look at it, I think, at the beginning of every month, what should be moved out. And it's a good thing to move it out, regardless of how hard people are lobbying internally to get their stuff in front of the sales team.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think ruthless prioritization is something that I spend a lot of time working with my ops and enablement team. I think that's a really good point. The other thing that is also like, what's the modality in which you're asking these reps to consume the information? So if it's just like a knowledge check, like that could be something that's like pretty easy to validate and get done and move on. And then if it's really, comprehensive skill building, I think you should focus that a lot with the frontline leader, and it should be tailored to each individual. And so we kind of keep an eye on, and I actually, we have fundamentally instilled, like, I only want each rep working on one skill a quarter, right? And I want them getting really, really good at that. An old mentor of mine used to equate it to a golf swing. If you swung a golf club and I told you, like, your stance was off, your grip's off, like this is off, and I told you 30 things to fix, like you'd still be just as confused as you showed up. But if you just fix one thing and hit the ball 100 times, like you'll probably get good at that and then move on to the next thing. And so I think there's also that element of it. But I couldn't agree more with the ruthless prioritization. If we've been doing a lot, and like I find less is more now, more than ever. And so I think I agree.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Like, just how do you simplify? And I think the roadmap, right? And like having some foresight and accountability into, like, hey, this is what we have, what comes off, because we can't spend 40 hours a week on just enablement for the sales team, because when are they going to sell?
Yep.
Too, right? And then just the retention here. I was looking to make sure there wasn't a question. Again, if you guys have questions, drop them in. Keeping an eye on that chat. One of the things, going back to, like, when we think about just the focuses of a sales organization, there's kind of 5 key areas there. I think it'd be great to talk through, what have you guys applied in these kind of different stages to help improve productivity, or what have you not done well when it comes to this too? I think there's always learning from I was completely wrong as well. But like when we think about just admin task, right? CRM is one that comes to place, but how have you helped to streamline, improve just the administrative function of the day-to-day of the sales organization?
I'll go first on this one. This is where I get out of bed every day. So I think the biggest focus for me is making it easier for this, in this case, the seller or customer success. I look at both in this on the continuum of the sales cycle. It's making it so that there's less stuff to look at, fewer places to go, fewer distractions. You have to cut through all of their clutter that they have. So if you're a Salesforce shop or whatever your CRM happens to be, most other apps and tools will integrate in some way. So giving them fewer places they have to go to collect information, whether it's their reports and dashboards, whether it's CRM, whether you're using something like, a Gong or a Chorus, now part of ZoomInfo, conversational intelligence, give them fewer places to go so they can manage their calendar, they can manage their activities and their tasks. Have your calendar integrated is such a big deal, because how they manage their day and how they break it up is a really, really big difference maker in my view. I think that we ask more and more of our sellers now too. So these admin tasks could be as much as, okay, I have to remember to use the new messaging that just got rolled out. I have to make sure to capture these 4 elements to put in the CRM system during or after my call. And I think a lot of this has to do with making it as easy as possible. And that means fewer places to go with a lot of clarity, where they can enter as little as possible while still capturing the information you have to get. Yes, there are always going to be situations where there are a couple things you have to be able to capture in those interactions. But I think, to Dustin's point a moment ago, excuse me, it's getting really good at being clear with those, so they know, okay, great, I know what to do. There's muscle memory there. So they have to think about it less. They don't have to really focus. It becomes more automatic. And then I would also say, especially as you bring new people on, I'm not a big fan of over documenting things, but just make it clear. have a playbook so that if people forget, you've got very easy resources that they can go to get back up to speed. Again, can they perform that task all by themselves on a Tuesday night? That means that you've made it easy enough for them to understand. And if they need help, they know where to get it without having to call somebody. So keeping it in one place, making it clear, they know what good looks like, and you've given them the tools they need without having to overthink it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And to kind of double click into it, automating a lot of the day-to-day stuff, so they shouldn't have to log anything in the CRM. We use Affinity for Salesforce to do those things automatically. The other thing is to dive in around information you're requiring them to upload, or input into the CRM. And in my opinion, if you don't have an operating cadence around the data that field provides, you shouldn't be asking them to do it.
Yeah.
And so you have to have reports of that information you're looking at. It should move the needle on you running the business. Otherwise, don't require them to put in. So I think people can, the best thing about a Salesforce is you can do anything with it. The worst thing is you can do anything with it. You spend so much time creating all of these things and inputs that they need, and then you don't ever report on it, or it doesn't drive any operational change. So then the reps are like, why am I even doing this?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have to ask yourself the really hard question around, what am I going to do with this data when I have it? And is it going to be accurate? And there's other questions you have to ask yourself, like free text fields, what are you going to do with that data? It's non-structured data. You can't actually report on it. So you're just making a rep do something. And unless you're going to operationalize it, I would be very cautious on whether you would require it or even have it in their view at all. And so I'm a big fan of stripping down all the different fields and things you need to require from them, because unless you're going to use it, it becomes useless over time.
Yeah. Molly, if I can add, I actually have a strict policy, and a lot of the people around me have started to really take on to it, where if we can't measure it, we are not going to put it in. Because honestly, it ends up being a task, but what are you going to do with it? It either has to make it easier for you to make a decision, or allow you to take an action. If it can't do one of those things, you really have to question why you need to capture it at all.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that I think about is back to your original point, Andy, of how do you make it consumable for somebody to understand, is do your words matter, right? Field labels, using the right tool tips, and those types of things as well, do help save time and drive enablement and make things easier as well there. We did have a question come in from Joshua. Thanks, Joshua. He asked, what tools are sales leaders using to track activities or interactions with their sales rep? Is there an all-in-one tool instead of using multiple tools that make scattered data hard to find and organize? Dustin, I'll let you maybe jump in on this one. I know you've mentioned how you guys track, so.
Yeah, we use Affinity for Salesforce to pull in all of our activity and calendar data into Salesforce. And there's plenty of tools out there that do some of those similar things. But most of the time it is some of an add-on. There are some native Salesforce solutions, but have mixed reviews, so to speak. And so I think there's a pretty big market out there of tools, and it really just depends on what your use case is. We tend to try to pull the user out of the CRM and get them to work where they want. But yeah, there's all kinds of ways. I think the question you need to ask yourself is, make sure that data is available back in Salesforce for you to actually report on, versus it being just kind of like a wireframe in top of Salesforce. I think if you're using Salesforce as a CRM, there's a big difference between having the native reporting so you can pull out and kind of standardize your data set on those inputs, versus just a wireframe on a certain page that you can't really integrate with your other data, and so it kind of becomes useless. So yeah, there's plenty of options out there, but and then I'm actually extremely excited about the productivity gains that AI can offer in this way. I've seen some amazing tools around meeting recaps and then pulling that data automatically into Salesforce, or notifying your reps. I'm an advisor to a couple of companies that do this, and that's the productivity gains, I think, for AI. I know it's kind of a buzzword obviously now, but I think it can really, really make some of the painstaking, inputting and note taking and research that reps have to do, I think there's a huge opportunity to cut out a lot of time for them.
Andy, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think it feels a little bit, again, a little bit Big Brother or being watched, but the AI piece, you saw my reaction. That's exactly where I was going to go, because I think, especially from a RevOps perspective, the promise on how much we can support teams like Dustin's as a CRO and a sales leader overall. I mean, if you think about where I think this is going to take us very soon, because we already have bits and pieces of this. If you have, conversational intelligence app, and you have it listening to your call and it's taking notes for you, and then it tries to summarize what it heard happen in the call, and then it suggests possible next steps. And again, with data behind it, it might know, well, if you don't talk to Mary Smith, your odds of closing this deal at this particular account actually go down. So you have to talk to her. You have to make sure she's involved at this stage. Those things are very real and they're very close. So I also am an advisor in a couple different companies in the AI space. And to me, without naming anything, these concepts of bringing it all together, because today it is still a few too many apps. It's not that nirvana I want to get to, I described earlier, where they're just looking at one screen. There are a lot of inputs. And I think AI, kind of like data warehousing and now actually getting rid of dashboards, just having multiple sources come to one place, that's the king. Sort of like a sales kiosk where your seller can interact with a thing, regardless of what the apps are behind it. And it will bring everything together for you, but not just tell you where you are, actually give you suggestions on what you probably need to go and do next. It really is the ultimate in serving these things up so that you don't have to have people hunt for new information.
Yeah, it's like, tell me what to do next, right? What's my next best
or at least
action?
make a suggestion. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can determine that, but it goes back to just, I'd go back, 10 years ago. It's like, what lead should I look at, right? When the whole concept of just lead scoring was coming in, it's like, help me prioritize where I should be spending my time and how I should be spending my time, but using data, using AI to help drive that. One of the next topics kind of in that cycle was like prospect research. So I think we're digging into that and have talked a little bit about, how that can support, but, how have you guys helped just get that prospecting muscle? I think about SDR productivity and engagement from that standpoint, but how do you prioritize who you're prospecting, right? And how you're sourcing?
Yeah, we use a lot of AI around measuring a lot of our intent and then suggesting things. I think the research phase is actually really, really powerful here. We talk to pretty sophisticated buyers, and you can't really just show up to that first phone conversation without a pretty strong point of view on who they are as an organization and how we might help and how we've helped others like them. And so enabling them with those tools to do the research in a much faster way, because that was always the issue, is like before AI, the level of depth you could get in research was directly proportional to the amount of time you spent. Like now you can get really, really deep on both the people and the company or their industry in a way that's very contextual to the discussion. And so I'm really excited about, I think I also, with these things, I caution everyone to go all in. What we do is we kind of pilot them. What you find is there's like Andrew had mentioned, there's some breakdown in workflow sometimes because they're all disjointed tools. So you want to make sure that if you're rolling it out to your broader team, that you've kind of narrowed in actually how they go from point A to point B, because otherwise they're kind of all over the place. But yeah, really exciting to I think use these tools on what used to be a very laborious process doing research, and frankly, no one did it really well. So then I'm really excited for the quality of conversations to improve as these things get better.
I think that's the big thing that I love that you said was the quality, right? So it's how do you take and streamline the information gathering, the centralization of that, and apply it to the experience, right?
Yeah.
And make sure you are driving that right experience. And that's a lot of what I think about with the AI, right? The AI is not eliminating the experience and driving the experience. It's feeding that right information to create that experience and apply that.
Mm-hmm.
Andy, anything to add from your side?
Yeah, I mean, for my nickel, I think getting through. I've been a buyer now a lot longer than I was a seller. Getting through to prospects, I think, is tougher than ever because there are, again, we're in a market space where there are so many different solutions, and I think there's really no excuse anymore for not doing a decent level, like you mentioned, Dustin, you and Molly both mentioned, around higher quality research. Something really has to hit home for me to cut through my own clutter. I mean, I probably get 25 or 30 prospecting messages a day in my email. And I think, the apps and tools out here now are getting it so that you can really reduce your waste. I think for SDRs and for ISRs and even for, field quota carrying sellers, the days of spreading just a wide message out there and hoping somebody might bite, there's kind of no excuse for it anymore. Really reduce your waste, identify that individual customer profile and have everybody aimed at that. And then make sure the message really resonates. Otherwise, you're not going to get someone to part with, again, their precious time, cut through their day, their clutter. They actually have to perform that action too, right? They actually have to decide, I'm going to respond to this. And that also means they're committed to spending some more time in another place. So it has to be a high quality message where I think people can say, I guess I can really understand how this might help me. It's either get more done in less time, like we talked about earlier, make my team's jobs faster, more efficient, whatever we want to call it, but it has to be worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Our standards as buyers have gone up, right? Where our expectations for how we're sold to matter, right? And I think that's just completely changed. We've got some good tool questions in here, and I'm looking forward to the answers. One of which was, is there anything you wish CRM or certain tools like Salesforce could capture? Social interaction, activities, for example. Like, where are you seeing maybe some gaps in what you've been able to capture?
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done, in my opinion, in really, really integrating the LinkedIn type prospecting motion into your core CRM. Like, there's tools out there that kind of supposedly tie that activity together, but it's still even hard to connect the dots between your traditional phone, email channels and a lot of the social, in mail or outbound with LinkedIn Sales Navigator. I think they've somewhat built a wall between themselves. It's difficult to get that in, like really a 360 view of the activity. I also have found that, believe it or not, when you can get on a text messaging basis with your buyer, like the close rates go through the roof. And so it's also difficult to track that activity in one unified way. Like, you have to measure it more on a anecdotal way than automated. So I think those are things that, as the buying process will continue to change, that would be great to start to fold in. But we also have way more data and insights than we ever had, and so, like, you can also get nitpicky with these things. And so I think it's just important to start small and validate that those inputs are actually moving the needle for you, and then work on getting them in this like single pane of glass. So, yeah.
Andy, anything missing from your side from capture?
Very much agreed. Again, some of the kind of the gold standards that a lot of us use, things like LinkedIn Sales Navigator and some others, have gotten kind of walled off. And I think it's because, in some cases they know what they have, so they don't want to integrate. I mean, for me, again, I go back to AI a little bit. It's apps that start to find the ability to pull things out of the separate applications, consolidators, to give you, fewer places to go. Again, kind of like that kiosk I commented on earlier, has really sort of fascinated me, because again, you have to bring your existing data, your customer data, your prospecting data, everything then going on about those prospects, the humans on social, what are they talking about? What are they interested in? To be able to really hit, one, that ICP, and then two, in your prospecting, make sure that that pre-call research we just talked about, that's what brings it all together. So I really wish those things were in fewer places and were more accessible. And I feel like we may get there, but we also may not, because if a big company owns one of these apps, example I just mentioned, you don't want it to be as open, because there is some value in keeping it closed for that organization. So I think whoever's able to crack some of that, I think will really pull ahead.
Absolutely. The other question around tools was recommendations in terms of tools that SDRs could use to gather information about a potential buyer prior to a call. So some of those research tools that maybe you have used or have heard of on the market.
Yeah, right now we're kind of testing a group of them in terms of just LLM tools that help you, like ChatGPT and others that enabling the team to have that kind of research assistant, so to speak. We've played around with building our own GPT that's uploaded with all of our enablement information, and so it starts to learn your all the different content that you have as a company, and starts to help SDRs. But the different LLMs that are out there, we also don't want to pigeonhole ourselves on one, so we're in kind of the testing phase. But the early results are really, really powerful. So we've built this kind of GPT that allows people to do research, and the GPT knows literally everything about Affinity. So it's but again, we're still in the early testing phase and haven't rolled it out completely, but there's a lot of opportunity ahead for these things. And if you start to also tap into your transcripts of all your calls, like there's a lot of data in there and insights in there that these AI tools are very good at summarizing back to your team. So yeah, still early in the game though.
Yeah, I've been pretty intrigued. There's a company producing an app called rev.ai, and I really have, to me, it brings a couple of the concepts together. It really helps figure out, are you going after the right accounts? Are your territories clean? And it helps, I would say it helps SDRs make sure that they're spending their time in the right place. So it helps them consult, if you will. It brings a lot of information from other sources like, Zoom info, contact information together. It sort of marries the account hierarchies and the sales territories and the ICP together to tell the SDR, hey, spend your time over here, get your AEs in here, because you also marry in things like 6 Sense and some of the AI. And I think it just tells you about buyer propensity. And it tells you, if you spend time here, your odds of winning business are higher. It's all about keeping the waste down. I think that you marry that with some of the things we talked about earlier. It really just tells you, hey, let's go places where the risk is lower and the reward is higher. It seems obvious, but it's been hard to get to that information for a long time.
I also think there's a huge opportunity for people, particularly in like the SDR organization, to take a fresh look at what the SDR role is going to look like in the future with all this stuff, and how can you rethink the kind of job to be done there and actually add a tremendous amount of value in the buying process as an SDR. And I'm really excited for. I still think we're in very early innings there, but like if I was in an SDR seat or an SDR leader seat, I would be. I really do think it's game-changing technology that can reinvent how the job is done, and I think the ones that lean into that are the ones that will win in the future versus the ones that are worried about it taking over. I think there's a huge opportunity for people to lean into those things.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple more questions in here. One back to SMS and texting. How do you guys manage the opt-in process? So knowing that there's different requirements that impact that, how is that being managed? I know that might be a little off topic, but I think it's a good one to
we have
understand.
I forget what tool we use to for opt-in, but they can opt in via the text message. We also, when they give us their cell phone numbers, that's oftentimes how it happens, where a rep will actually just have a conversation with the person and say, hey, like, do you want me to text you here or there? And so like that's really where that personal relationship starts to happen, and it becomes a
that
it's
one-to-one
not a cycle that we typically start texting people. It's more of like after they've built the relationship, and it's a one-to-one conversation that is opted in by the because they're giving us the phone number and they're asking us to do these things to keep them up to date. So yeah, that's typically how it's done.
Perfect. Question for you, Andy. So Lindy is intrigued by the sales kiosk idea. What roles do you feel like will have the most benefit from this holistic view?
Every single one. I mean, I want one. I want a place I can go. We've been talking about single pane of glass, 360-degree view of the customer as long as I can remember. And I think the sales kiosk specifically, I think is really something that can be catered for different job roles. So an SDR version, a sales rep version, a CS, like a customer success manager, individual contributor. And then for managers, I think it's a different flavor of that, where the views, if you think about the early promise of CRM, and I guess still the promise of CRM, it was supposed to be a bit of a one-stop shop where you weren't just putting things in, you were getting things out. And some companies have gotten there in varying degrees, but I feel like SDR, AE, CSM, and then first line managers specifically, I think can really benefit because they have so many different inputs. I think RevOps people, just being a little selfish for a second, because we have so many different inputs. I mean, within my org, I have sales operations, marketing operations, customer success operations, sales enablement, global services, and partner and channel operations. Those are very different subjects where I have to actually bring a lot of not just content together, but people together. So having a bit of a kiosk, it's almost like the old school portal concept, but it would actually do something. I think all of those roles distinctly can have different versions of that would save all of us a lot of time.
I'm really excited about this notion as well. Like I'm seeing the AI space kind of bifurcate into two areas. You have what I would call basic productivity hacks, which is like recapping calls, doing research, which helps you like summarize and get information in a fast way. And then, which is taking advantage of essentially the internet and data that's available to all of us and streamlining that process. Then there's this like walled garden approach to AI, where if you can basically, I think it has the opportunity to completely change the interface of CRM. Like, why can't I just pull up a GPT like question or like and say like, how is the deal at ABC company going? Or why can't I ask the CRM, instead of going in and report and configuring a report and building a dashboard, why can't I ask the question and it surface that data up to me in a way? And I think you're going to see a lot of CRMs, the entire way we interface with all of that data is going to completely change in the future. And that's a really exciting thing.
All spoken through your mobile.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a huge opportunity for that.
If I could get to a world where I'm not building ad hoc Salesforce reports to just like answer a really simple question, like my life would be just complete, right? Like when you just are like, what's the number of this? And it's like, well, give me 10 minutes to go like put it all together and get you that number for that one-time answer.
That was me 2.5 hours ago. Yes.
I think it's important to talk about that for 2 minutes. If I were you, I would be getting your data in order.
Yep.
Because it's going to be very difficult for you to take advantage of these things if your data isn't in order, because it's going to go look, and if it's not, it's going to spit up bad information to you, and then you and the entire team isn't going to trust it. So like we're spending a ton of time right now doing the really heavy lifting of data governance, and I think and the reason why I'm doing it is because not because I enjoy it or it's a fun process, but because it's kind of in preparation mode for what's to come.
I really want to double down on that. It's the ultimate in garbage in, garbage out, because even the early days of ChatGPT, I say that like it's a really long time ago, but you'll remember in the beginning, it wasn't spitting much out because it didn't have much to draw on. And then it started to get biases because there was more information, but it would swing one way or another. Now it's got a problem with clutter. So if you don't make sure that your data is thorough, clean, and easy to extract in a usable structure, all of the apps and tools in the world are not going to help you. You're just going to get different versions of garbage out.
Yeah, and to the point on, the garbage in, garbage out from data, that goes back to your process too. So making sure you've got the clarity around your process, because that ultimately is what produces your data and is the production source of it. So love thinking that, and that's when you can start to build your ML models to actually govern and normalize and structure data in a meaningful way. Another question for you guys: what is a healthy percentage in the SaaS industry for lead generation? So marketing inbound versus SDR outbound. More, and this is a two-parter. Sorry, so I'm going to give you part one, and I'm going to give you part two at the same time. Moreover, do you think AE should prospect as well as SDRs? So the first one is kind of the breakdown of generation between, marketing inbound and SDR outbound for a healthy mix. And then how much should AEs be prospecting versus SDRs?
There is quite a lot of insight on this. I wish there was one singular answer, but it really depends on how big your deals are and what segment those deals are sold into. Typically, when you look at as you move down market, you'll see a higher reliance on marketing and less reliance on your AE and SDR. As you move up, you'll have a much higher reliance on your human element of that. In terms of, do I believe that SDRs and AEs should both prospect? That's a philosophical yes for me, but there are other I also believe that there's no such thing as like completely cold outbound. Like you should surface up intent, and then based on where that buyer is in the journey, should determine the persona that does the prospecting. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily cold outbound, but I think if you're an AE and you aren't prospecting, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to hit your number. Right.
Andy, thoughts?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this. I could talk for over an hour, and we talk about this a lot. And I think as we move into more of a proper multi-touch attribution world, it's not just first touch, last touch, sourced or influenced. It's looking at the relative amounts. Let me go in reverse order. I do believe that AEs should also do a portion of their own prospecting. I think that especially inside of an account, especially larger accounts, to Dustin's point, as you go up market, for lack of a better phrase, a large account, global account manager, strategic account manager, just a big account for the company. The AE is the one building those relationships, and everything being an intro via an SDR, I don't think is a good use of time. I also agree with marketing being more important as you go toward, smaller deals and smaller target companies, because it's generally more volume to get there. However, I also find that we like that level of marketing air cover in larger deals with bigger prospects as well, because it sort of reinforces, it lends more credibility. I mean, in terms of mix, I feel like, 30-40% for marketing is for us has been really healthy. It's been different mixes at other companies. I think an AE should be, filling their funnel with 15 or 20% of their own. So you think about it, it's less than a fifth. It's not that much. And then SDR kind of bridges that gap in between. Depending on your organization, you might get some things coming in through partners as well. So we look at all three of those. But again, your mileage may vary. It really depends a lot on what you're selling, what the market space is like, your deal size. I also think sales cycle length can really make a big difference.
There's a more important element to this. Alignment is actually more important than the number.
Yeah.
And the way that you do that is understand your different pipeline sources, understand the attribution model that you want to run on those sources, and then get SLAs between each one of those teams on the conversions of those sources that translate to a revenue number. So the like utopia is to get every single pipeline source on a revenue target. So if I have $1 million of pipeline that's coming from marketing, and I know that I'm going to hold my sales team accountable to a 30% conversion, that's $300K. That $300K, if I have a $10 million total number, I got to find other sources that get the revenue number to get to 10 million. And so driving that SLA across each one of those teams, and then measuring that on a weekly or monthly basis, so that, and then it also gives optionality to your marketing team, because if like inbound demo request has a much higher conversion rate, they can either do a bunch of those, or maybe some of the softer kind of downloads and clicks of things has a much lower conversion rate, or they can increase the volume of that. So it gives them a way to hit the target, and it's all based on a revenue number versus this arbitrary pipeline number that can sometimes be inflated. So you don't have marketing crushing their number and the sales team still starving, or vice versa.
Yeah,
you got a big problem when that happens.
Yeah, and the whole, just to put a pin in that, because I want to say yes, 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 and yes. To me, and I think this echoes what Justin said, is that looking at kind of who got what and this attribution war part 27 is a waste of time. If everyone has to touch something in their own way with clean handoffs and you're able to start getting in the motion, get the machine turning, I'll take it all day. Yes.
Yeah, the buyer doesn't care who gets the credit for the lead.
No, and you shouldn't either. It should all be relative. Yeah.
Absolutely. Probably last question we've got 4 minutes left. So given Andy's point on multi-touch, how do you solve for the attribution issue? So when we think about lead source and getting like that ROI on those different investments, what have you found that's kind of worked for measuring attribution?
Yeah, there's pretty hard ones, like a demo request, right? Like that is probably directly attributed to marketing. And then we use 6 Sense and look at intent and kind of measure who owns the different buckets of intent, and that's how we think about attribution. And then we have SLAs on those conversion rates for each one of those things by segment, and that then translates into a revenue goal that we have. And so we're either talking about ways to generate more of those channels, either more direct inbound kind of hand raisers, as we call them, or increase awareness so that we can move those people down through the intent funnel. And then we just measure conversions at the team and rep level so that we're maintaining our SLA to marketing. So that's kind of how we do it. It's a very simple view of how we do it, but we try not to get super overcomplicated about attribution because we find it's a waste of time, and most of the time it's made up anyway. So yeah.
I was like, yep.
Yeah. It's not worth the discussion. The fighting is so anti-productive. And again, everyone should be concerned about the revenue number at the end of the day. So I just think this is something that some companies can get hung up on, and it sort of sticks in their culture. And the diminishing rate of that return is so low. As long as relatively you can measure the trend, because you do still have to be able to do that, but it's all relative. Not everything's created equal. Downloading a white paper is different than having, going to have dinner with a CEO one-to-one. As long as you can measure the relative importance and then look at your trend, everything should be good. You just need everyone to buy in and agree.
Yeah, like it's like, for how many years did like salespeople thought that marketing just did arts and crafts, and marketing people thought that salespeople were a bunch of overpaid like bros that didn't care about doing anything or following up with anything? Like if you just align everybody to the company goal, like it all goes like we're all fighting for the same thing. And I think that's where we've wasted a lot of time doing the opposite.
One team.
Yep, absolutely. Perfect. Well, really appreciate having you both here today. Any parting thoughts on productivity as we wrap up? Words of wisdom, last minute advice, anything you didn't get to say that you wanted to?
I think we're entering into probably the biggest gain of productivity that we've had in the last 10 years in revenue. And I'm excited to see where it goes. Yeah.
Measure everything you do and get lots of feedback to make sure you're measuring the right things.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining today. And I don't know if we can drop maybe LinkedIn profiles in the chat. Gina, that'd be great for anyone who wants to connect with Andrew or Dustin. I'm sure they would appreciate that. And thank you guys so much. Great conversation. Hopefully everyone had a little happy hour or is going to a happy hour based on how we kick things off.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Bye, all.